Elon Musk. I wanted to share the model of how I'm thinking about his psychology and his behavior, and talk about where I think it might go. Today is July 24th, and he's just rebranded Twitter to X. I have my own opinions about it, but the video is not about that. In fact, I'm kind of cheering for the guy. He's like a generational genius, and I really hope that we get more of his genius. And I'm trying to understand how a mind like that works. And so I want to just kind of walk you through some of my thinking on that, and you can decide for yourself what you think. This is based on the last 150 years of psychological study. It's one of my areas of interest, so I'm just kind of putting some pieces together and floating this out there. So I'm just going to walk through a few stages of life. The first one is one of the most important ones, but I'll get to the third one, which is where Elon is now, and then the fourth one, which is kind of my speculation on the future. But Elon Musk makes no secrets about how difficult his childhood was. By all accounts, in his entire family, his father was a bit of a monster, treated them poorly, psychologically abused them. And that checks out with a level of ambition that he has. And I'll talk about that in the next stage. But children that experience psychological abuse, physical violence, or poverty can't handle those emotions. They're too big, and so what they end up doing is they repress those emotions. So they bottle these up, and they also end up not being themselves as children. They end up watching the world very closely. They tend to go inward, which explains a lot of Elon's kind of like very brilliant thinking, his engineering mindset, trying to understand how the world works, which is quite consistent with children that aren't allowed to kind of express themselves and be themselves as kids. So he would have been very sad, angry, scared, but wouldn't have felt those feelings as a kid. He would have just kind of repressed them. And this was kind of the beginning of the energy that he has to do everything he's done. And the more extreme the suffering, the more extreme the feelings, and the more kind of fuel and power there is going forward. So let me get up here to the stage two. So calling this like adult and midlife. I don't know why I have this arrow here. Anyway, I'll just leave it there. So in this stage, uh, the person is finding the way to be in the world, and all of that kind of energy that they have um, from the past is being used to make them feel better about themselves. Because when they were a kid, they felt worthless, they felt, invisible, and now as an adult, they're trying to make up for that. And this isn't a conscious thing that's happening. This is just a kind of a subconscious force, and this is where ambition comes from. So they want to prove their worth. They want to be secure because they felt very unsecure and unsafe as children, and they want to be seen as themselves, not as necessarily the parent wanted to see them. They want to be seen as themselves, their own achievements, and these are kind of the main drivers that drive very ambitious people. And the level of the suffering also contributes to the level of the ambition, and they tend to be proportional to each other. And I'll introduce a few kind of other things in here. So stories start to become a thing when people reach this stage. They start to like feel different things, and they start to tell themselves stories about why they're doing what they're doing. If you remember, Elon, through a bunch of his career, has had incredible setbacks. He's had to make huge sacrifices with family, happiness, money, and there has to be a story that you tell yourself to make that all worth it. And so the stories can be things like save the world or I'm helping others. It's my calling. The struggle is worth it. Anybody who's making big pushes and making big sacrifices in their life has a story that they tell themselves. And these are powerful stories that give them like tremendous energy to keep pushing. And this is kind of Elon's Tesla, SpaceX, period where he's really he's pushed himself quite hard to achieve all these things, and they're very positive things. And the thing that you see with very kind of ambitious people is that there's a very positive part to their upcoming. And then the third stage can sometimes go the other way, and I think that's a possibility with Elon. But I'll talk about that in a second. And these stories kind of keep the feelings in check. So you can think of these repressed feelings here as like feelings that need to come out. So a kid that felt that experienced like difficulties as a child can sometimes want to, express those things, take them out on other people. It's the motivation behind why bullies bully people, and why you also see in a lot of famous people, there's like little hints of bad behavior that you'll see early in their careers, and they start to escalate. So those feelings that were repressed as a child, there's a part of us, an unconscious part of us that is like that needs to kind of get that energy out. And it's usually negative energy because they've been sort of caged up for so long. And just like an animal that's caged up, it gets aggressive, it gets kind of like animalistic. And so those feelings start to come out. But the stories about saving the world, helping others, I'm not safe yet, I don't have enough money yet, I haven't been seen enough yet. Those stories keep those negative forces in check and keep those behaviors in check. Um, and then other things here are attractors: money, power, fame. They're kind of related to these, right? Money, security, fame, being seen, um, and then power. Well, power and worth maybe isn't connected there, but there is a connection. So the attraction to some of these things are representations of what the child, or they're immeasurable, visible representations of what the child didn't see. Everybody in culture and in the world can see how much money you have, how much power you have, and how famous you are. So now we move on to like the third adult stage. And this is the stage where success has been reached, whether it's a politician reaching their office, it's an entrepreneur becoming a billionaire, it's Elon Musk achieving Tesla and SpaceX and everything he's done. They've reached a point where they've proven their worth, they've achieved their security, they're rich, and they're recognized. So they no longer want for money, they're no longer worried about harm, and they're famous, so they're insulated, protected from criticism as well. And those are important things because they relate to the checks that keep the bad behavior under wraps. And so happening. So once all those things have been achieved, the stories that the person can tell themselves about that keep those bad behaviors in check, they start to loosen, right? The person also feels less like they need to push for that security, for the fame, for the money. So that side of it starts to kind of relax a little bit. And they start using stories to justify their bad behavior. So this is kind of a time where you start to see like erratic behavior, bad behaviors. I don't want to get into like specific examples in history, but think about like some of the worst people, dictators in history, and they have this kind of a trajectory where they started off quite altruistic. They even did a lot of good for their countries, and then as things started to change, as they got to the place they wanted to be and felt seen, felt free from harm, had money, those forces started to get overwhelmed. And so we have stories like, look at all the people who like me. So you have sycophants around you that let you tell yourself that you're liked. You tell yourself you're the smartest person in the room, you know best, because obviously, look at where you are. You're clearly um, something is special about you. Not everybody achieves, your status. You're doing this for the greater good, and then break some eggs to make an omelet is kind of they're connected. So you can write off harms, you can write off deaths, you can write off big problems by saying, this is just kind of what's required, and the means are justify the ends because the ends are going to be better. We'll make this a spacefaring civilization, or I'm doing this for free speech in the case of Elon Musk. So this is kind of the moment where the bad behavior escalates and it starts to ratchet up. And I feel like as time goes on, Elon Musk is showing more and more of this erratic and sort of bad behavior, and he's not responsive to the checks that might have kept him in check before. And this is the part that kind of makes me think that this is only going to escalate. I've not seen any signs that would suggest that he's not going to, that he's kind of going to, tone this down. Like the checks are out, the bad behavior is escalating, and all that negative, repressed energy, all that anger is starting to come out. Um, so where does this go? I think there's kind of like three different outcomes. One is that his this kind of like subconscious, like powerful part of him that was repressed for so long keeps pushing itself out there and just uses his all the money he's made and all the things he's done to just consume all of that like fuel to satisfy itself. This might look like, just not caring about the $44 billion he spent on Twitter and just doing whatever he wants to it and kind of like sinking it or just doing whatever until it's nothing. It could mean losing Tesla, losing SpaceX, and this wouldn't be conscious, obviously, but this kind of force can become overwhelming. And with a lot of people, a lot of famous people who start acting really badly, their behavior gets worse and worse over time. So it doesn't actually change typically. Or he kind of lives a life of harm. So he keeps doing things. He doesn't destroy his whole empire, but he's starts doing more and more kind of harmful things or negative things, unhelpful things in the world. And all of the positive things he's done in the past essentially start to switch around, and now his life becomes net negative. Um, or he realizes he's on the wrong path. He starts to see that he's got these forces, these stories, these things from his past that are starting to affect him, and he decides to change. This one almost never happens for people that are as far along as he is. Usually, it takes incredible failure and crisis to have the reason to self-reflect. But back to the point of like, you have all the money you need, you have adulation, and you have power. There's very little reason to, self-reflect. Clearly, you've gotten everything you wanted. And so this one is pretty unlikely. So that's kind of the layout of kind of how I'm thinking about this. I think based on what I'm seeing, this one is probably the most likely. I don't think he's going to destroy everything. I just think he's going to like take it down a path that he sees as justified, but in the end will end up being net negative. I hope he doesn't, but that's kind of where I think we're at. Anyway, that's it.